Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Relevance and Relatability, using this year's Elephants in the Room to deepen student learning and engagement in AP English. This disembodied voice is Tiffany Tang. I am the marketing coordinator for BFW High School Publishers. If you're not familiar with BFW, we're a high school publisher that focuses on AP textbooks, and our lovely author team has written a full pre-AP to English textbook program that starts with 9th graders and builds up their composition and reading skills all the way up to 12th grade, which helps them prepare for both AP English, college, and career tasks. Before we get started, let's go to the next slide. I just want to point out some really quick things about GoToWebinar, the program that we're using today. First thing I'd like to point out is that all attendees are muted. That's just to prevent any sort of background noise or echo throughout the presentation. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties or would like to ask an organizer something, please use the chat or the questions function in the GoToWebinar pop-up panel. Just a heads up, you want to keep an eye out on that chat function because we've got some fun little interactive activities going on. So we'll point those out when those happen. Also, the last thing I'd like to point out is that we are currently recording this webinar for later review. So if you happen to have any technical difficulties or you need to leave early, don't worry, we will be sending out a recording later on. So let's head on over to the next slide. And I want to introduce our lovely presenters today. First up in my author videos, we have Robin Aufses. Robin Aufses has been an AP Language and AP Literature teacher for over 25 years, including 10 years as the English Department Chair at John F. Kennedy High School in Belmore, New York, and 10 years now Director of English at Lycée Français de New York. Next up in our author video, we have Megan Pankiewicz. Megan is a National Board Certified teacher with over 10 years of experience in secondary English language arts. She currently teaches in Rockville High School in Maryland as the staff development teacher, AP coordinator, and AP language teacher. A lot of stuff to go through. Next up, we have Larry Scanlon. He was an AP Language and AP Literature teacher for over 30 years. And he also works a lot with College Board as an AP reader, table leader, and question leader for over 20 years. He also conducts numerous AP workshops as an AP College Board consultant. Last but not least, we have Renee. She's a former high school teacher and director of freshman composition at Bowie State University, and she has a big hand with College Board, serving as a reader, table leader, question leader for both AP Literature and AP Language. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to them to get the webinar started.
Okay, Megan, I'll take a look at the agenda here. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for the introductions. We've just done our introductions and housekeeping, so we're moving right on. We're going to do a little icebreaker here on what conversation, then we're going to talk about monuments and memorials, and then we're going to do something with the Miami Dolphins. And then we'll send you on your way. But I want to begin by saying the elephants in the room. We came up with this topic thinking right now about the various elements in the room, and that has absolutely no allusion. It is not meant to be an allusion to any political party, but we're thinking here about the multiple crises of health, politics, economics, and social justice, and all of the things that all the teachers in the classroom have to deal with today. So we're going to try to talk about ways to engage students. We're going to make specific reference to, of course, to the remote learning that many of you are involved with, but we're also going to go old school sometime and just talk about things to do to engage kids right now, but all the time in civil discourse and working through some pretty controversial topics, but ones we hope we'll be engaging both before the election and after next week as well. So if we can begin, we're going to, so many of our textbooks work on conversation, the concept of a conversation. And so when I was working with the Columbus Public Schools, and I am in Columbus, Ohio, I don't think, I'm not sure if Tiffany, if she made a point here. We have Robin in New York and Megan in Maryland and D.C., Larry in New York, and I'm in Columbus, Ohio now. And working with the teachers about a week or so ago, we started with these images. I just pulled them off of Getty Images, so they're random and they're different time periods, because we were going to talk about what does it mean to have our students in conversation. What are the characteristics of a conversation? What kinds of things are you noticing here? So I'd like to begin by just saying, what do you see in any of these images? Any one or several of them that would characterize conversation? How do you define conversation? If you're telling your students about conversations, what do you notice here in these various images? You can put something in the chat if you'd like, or maybe we'll just talk about them one by one here. Anybody have any comments? I'm not seeing chats here. So
it looks like some people are answering. We have thoughtful listening, multiple people, eye contact.
Eye contact? I didn't identify the images. They're obviously from very different time periods, as I said, and I don't know if you can read the Baldwin quote in the one, but the more contemporary one is obviously in the middle. Anything else?
We've got engaging in stating something.
Ah, stating something. What does that mean? Whoever commented on that, maybe unmute or?
In stating something, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Anything else?
Skepticism.
Skepticism. Ah, well, that's Elizabeth Taylor and her about to be former husband negotiating a divorce agreement. So that was from a while back, but skepticism may be part of that. Well, I think anybody else? Anything else, Tiffany?
There's an idea that begs for attention and stating something we observe.
Okay. Any of my co-authors here have anything to add?
Well, I think, yeah, I want to say that image on the right with the little boy, I know I had that image identified for me before, but I forget. I find it a little terrifying. But it turns out that the real life thing is not as scary as it looks. Can you say what it is?
Yeah, it's in 1932, and these are kids in England, and I know it kind of looks like the Hitler Youth, Robin. I think that's how you're getting good. It's in 1932. Children from the East End of London are holding a meeting to discuss their day in the country.
Okay, good.
So that's exactly right. Oh, there's Lily. That's my dog. I've warned you all ahead of time, or I warned my co-authors ahead of time. It is trick-or-treat night in my neighborhood, and so the treats are outside the door, but Lily, the dog, is greeting. Anyway, yeah, I think it's interesting. Is it still a conversation? I think when one person clearly has stood up and is directing it. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting point. Yeah, absolutely. But I think one of the things in all of this is listening, and you know, you could use other images, obviously, but just to get that notion of eye contact, skepticism. I mean, there's some content here. So, okay, great. That's just the kinds of things we want to start with, because whether you're obviously remote learning or whatever you're doing, you're going to be trying to develop a conversation. You know, the whole notion of AP language was built on that idea of a group of people talking. You come in, you listen, you inform yourself before you come in and listen, or maybe you just learn through the conversation, but you are somewhat informed before you begin to contribute. You make a contribution, other people listen, and the conversation goes on. And that's really that's the construction of the language of composition. So it's always a good place to start there, not just because there's a synthesis question on the exam. So I will use that to segue into our next session here. As I said, we're going to do 3 separate ones here. We're going to talk about monuments and memorials kind of in 2 different ways. One will be a written text, and the other will be looking at some photographs of some real monuments and memorials that have been in the news. So I'll start out. Robin will pick up, and then we'll move on into Megan's presentation here. Any of you teach the Mitch Landrieu piece yet? The Mitch Landrieu piece is a speech that he gave in New Orleans in 2017. It's on, if you have TLC there by chance, it's in the Justice chapter, but it's on page 1093. Anybody teach it? Robin?
Like
yeah, go ahead. Tiff, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It looks like we do have some attendees that teach it as well.
Oh, good. Okay, so some of you already know it. So by all means, jump in here. Well, let me go on to the next. Well, let me stay here for a second, Megan. And that is that this is an interesting one because he is talking about the removal that has already happened. This is not your proposed change, call for action. Well, it's a call for action in some ways, but let me back up a little bit. The process in the community has already happened by the time that the monuments and the memorials are being removed, and 4 of them have already been removed. So Mitch Landrieu, who then the mayor of New Orleans, came out and he was speaking before a public building, and so his purpose with the community was to explain why he felt that that was, in fact, the right action. And here is obviously a photograph of one being taken off of a pedestal right then. So when you think about what's going on here and his purpose, it's clearly about healing rather than about a call to action to see what do we do, what comes next. Megan, could I go to the next slide here because I want to talk a little bit about procedure. One of the things that the College Board suggests in their course design is that teachers should strategically select, I'm reading here, the text they will teach, keeping in mind that a single text might be used to teach a range of skills. I bring this up because the Mitch Landrieu one is long. And as you think about how you use TLC, and Megan and Robin are currently doing that and have done it for a while, so they certainly can jump in here. But the notion of choice comes up so much. Which text do you use? And I think the Mitch Landrieu one, let me say this, the text I think everybody uses is probably King. I mean, Letter from Birmingham Jail is so much the classic text, and you could teach your whole course around that. I worked with the Annapolis School District at one point when they were developing an AP language course, and the teachers, I worked with teachers over the summer, and they determined that they wanted to start with King and end with King. They felt they would, at the beginning, it would sort of give kids a preview of all the stuff they were going to have to learn or that they have the opportunity to learn, and then at the end they would be able to celebrate with themselves about everything they have learned and how prepared they were for the exam. But there are other speeches like this one, and right now other speeches that are longer and richer. So in a way, I think about, I used to tell my graduate students, if you're going to do something at a conference, if you're going to spend time writing an article for a journal or writing a long paper for one of your courses, try to make it work for a number of things. And I think that's really what the College Board is suggesting here, that if you're going to ask them to read something long, if they're going to read Hamlet in a lit class, for example, be sure that you're able to use it in many different ways. This speech I just love. For one, again, remote learning. There's a YouTube video. It's 20-some minutes long, almost a half an hour. I mean, it's just a video of him, but it's really helpful to hear him and to hear the way he talks about these subjects. It's also rhetorically very rich, and it's a hot topic right now. This is in our final chapter, our justice chapter, which we like very, very much. But it is such a good topic because it's continuing to be in the news. In fact, it's probably more in the news since Black Lives Matter. It's still very current, as I say. It's an accessible one because of its contemporaneity, I think, and also it's not difficult. The language isn't difficult. The vocabulary isn't difficult. I love seeing people look at my co-authors are definitely shaking their heads. It's not that hard.
Renee, I just want to add that Mitch Landrieu is very active on Twitter. And so that's a very simple way of connecting what he's saying right now to even what he said a few years ago. So just throwing that out there.
No, that's perfect. Absolutely. And also he was thinking about running for president, and he did write a book following this. So he's, you know, there's certainly a number of things to go to here, but thank you. Absolutely. It's also a strong enough speech to generate all 3 free response questions. And I have them on the slides here. We're not going to go through them, but I mean, we will go through them, but I'm not going to really analyze them. And I think you also, the CED's 3 major big ideas, apart from style, which is the 4th one, rhetorical situation, claims and evidence, reasoning and organization, it's all here in great abundance. But main thing, and Robin's going to pick up on this, is that it's also a nucleus for continued research and inquiry. So if we can keep going here, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I teach this. Again, I start easy. Most of us do. I don't like binaries. I know the College Board doesn't like binaries, which is the purpose of the synthesis question, to look at nuance rather than pro and con. But I think binaries work here, because if his purpose is to ask for healing, what better way, a sort of overall strategy, maybe what the scoring guide now calls a line of reasoning, other than to look at binaries as a way then to come to unity. So when depending on where your students are, if they were able to come up with these on their own, that would be obviously better. But I just listed a few here. Truth and its opposite. Many people analyze this speech by just looking at the concept of truth, lies, deception, remembrance, inclusion, exclusion, freedom, enslavement, unity, division, and then voice and silence, which is always my favorite. So Megan, I'm going to be mindful of the time here, and let me say that what I have on the next 3 slides will be the beginning of the speech. And the beginning of the speech is, as I said here, 463 words. And that works because the exam, if you're thinking about the exam, because the exam's close reading question is 500 to 700 words. So you have right here this, you know, I've broken it up a little bit, and I just tried to look here at the beginning at, again, how do those binaries work? The soul of our beloved city, so it's our and diverse, good and ill, so many more, but then he specifies all these names. So just to go through these opening ones, these first 3, I think would give students a really good sense of where this speech is going. For years when we talked about King, people would say to me, well, what do you do is so much of it? We maybe start at the beginning and do the first part where he's addressing counter-arguments. Then you obviously have to pick up in various ways, whether you have students working in groups or you just choose certain sections to look at. But this beginning section, these first 3, I think are pretty solid ways to look at that. Megan, if we go to the next one, and I'm just going to briefly do that. The other thing I tried to do here was just to highlight this notion of truth, truly, searing truth. And then, you know, its opposite is obviously this notion of, well, e pluribus unum. Unum is also there. You're looking at the unity, diversity, division, exclusion, inclusion, and then also, as I said, this notion of truth, lies, and that is where Mitch Landrieu is trying to get to, this whole idea of history and what history it is and whose history it is. And at the end of in just this beginning passage, he talks about real history. In these days of news, fake news, information, misinformation, this is, again, pretty important, I think. Next slide, please, Megan. And here again, historical malfeasance, history, silence, lies, and this notion of remembrance and reverence. I think that's part of what we're working with right now as we continue to think about monuments and memorials. And by the end, we talk about hiding versus facing, which brings us back to Baldwin. So Okay, I want to look here, the close reading question. Anybody have any comments before we do that? Does anybody have any comments about how you teach it and how your students respond to it? That would be, I think, important before we go into how it might relate to the exam, if that's something you're interested in. But if any of you have any comments on how your students have responded to this, what the real challenges were, what kinds of things you worry about or are concerned about if you haven't taught it. Tiffany, if anybody has any comments on that, please bring them up for me.
Yeah, we actually have one question. And we have Adrian who's asking, is there a difference between a monument and a memorial?
Yes, there actually is, and that's going to come up as I move on here. I mean, the words are used interchangeably, and again, co-authors here, help me out. But the words are used interchangeably, but I do think the memorial is more about remembering. The monument is celebrating. There's a triumphant tone to a monument. A memorial is asking for remembrance. And I think these days when we talk about monuments, memorials, we have fewer monuments and more memorials as this concept changes. Megan?
The memorial seems to be, oh, go ahead, Megan.
Sorry, no, I was just going to add there was also this great piece, I'll have to try and look it up and send it, about the Andrew Jackson Shrine and why it's called a shrine as opposed to a monument or memorial. So just throwing that word out there too.
Well, Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial too. You think about that? Yeah. But Robin, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Let's keep going.
Okay. Well, and you'll pick up on that with Kehinde Wiley. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else, Tiff? That's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, we have one more. Instead of using the binaries, do you think it's better to use juxtaposition?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think that's a nice, I mean, you're right. Binaries these days has become almost a pejorative. So juxtaposition might well be a better way to approach it. Yeah, that he's juxtaposing these things and asking the audience to participate. That's a nice way to do it, to ask the audience to participate in finding a way to bring them together so they're not in opposition, but in fact they work together. Good point. Nice questions. Okay. Okay, Tiffany, anything else?
No,
okay.
We can move on.
All right. The rhetorical analysis question is the obvious one. I mean, I think, oops, I'll go fast, and that is that, yeah, that's okay. It depends on where you were using this, but obviously you used it at the beginning. You could just, at the beginning of your course, you could just use it at the beginning, but otherwise it could be a much larger one here. But it's all about rhetorical situation. That's why at the beginning, if this were a real, a question, you would have that set up the way the College Board does it, to explain that he's not asking people to vote on this or to do a referendum or to be supportive. He's saying this is a fait accompli. The monuments are down. Now here we go. Okay, let's go on to the next one. And you'll see that I'm asking students to move a little bit beyond what the College Board might do. And in the U.S. today, some see contemporary debates over monuments as merely the symptom of a liberal politics of representation, that others argue that the removal of these monuments can initiate change that moves toward greater understanding and justice. There are those who make the argument that we need to leave those monuments there because they are our history, and we need to look at Robert E. Lee or, various heroes, if you will, of the Confederacy, and that we need to, or Columbus, who has come into great controversy in my city. In fact, there's some question about changing the name, and that we might want to leave them as a way for us to grapple with it. And then there are others who just say, oh, this is just part of political correctness and it'll go away. And others say, no, we really have to change here. And part of what you might look at with this question, but I'll bring it up in the next one too, is what have other places done? I mean, where is Stalin? Where is Lenin? Where did they go? So again, using Landru as a nucleus and moving on out. Okay, Megan, I'm going to be finished in 1 second here, so if you'll take me to the next one. One of the issues with monuments and memorials is, and this was this lovely lecture also that I think Robin and I both heard the other night. They were talking about the fact that monuments, the tools, the language of monuments and memorials has changed so much. And it used to be granite and steel, and there were metals and marble, and it was representational. But much has changed now when we think about especially memorials rather than monuments, which is why I was so glad to get that question. So the synthesis question I said is an adaptation here. It wouldn't be on the exam, but to me this is what's really interesting right now. The writer James Baldwin wrote, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. After studying the following sources, write an essay that develops your position on the role, if any, of monuments, museums, and memorials as catalysts for positive change. And what I've done is link here a number of places like the Kigali Genocide Museum, whose titles actually are pretty harsh. I mean, the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe is not exactly mincing words, and the Apartheid Museum. And how do we come to terms with that? So many of these are more contemplative, they're more reflective, they are in some ways therapeutic rather than triumphant, but they really ask, what's the purpose in our contemporary world? If we, and the of course quintessential one probably in the United States is the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which is the Equal Justice Initiative's memorial, and that one is really one where whose nickname, and not nickname, but many people know it as the Lynching Museum, and that one is a good example of one where some people would say, oh, I don't think we should emphasize this unjust past, this shameful past, and others are, including Brian Stevenson, is saying we need to, in fact,
face it.
Face it and examine our conscience. So some of those links I hope you'll explore on your own, because I want to turn this over to Robin now to go into a very contemporary example of monuments, memorials that has really made the news and is very exciting. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Robin.
Okay. All right. So Renee and I were, she actually watched the lecture. I just kind of read about it, and we both cribbed some language from the lecture at Cooper Hewitt. But before I go on, of course, I'm thinking about the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, which is interesting. I mean, it is a memorial, and it's been, I think, from what I've read, one of the most successful memorials ever. It gets huge crowds. It was controversial when it was being built, but there doesn't seem to be very much controversy attached to it. And I think a lot of that is that it functions so well as a memorial because of the names. It brings something to life in a way that, is different from a statue. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Kehinde Wiley, who is a contemporary artist, and the questions, as Renee said, what politics are at play in the historical cycles of constructing and removing public monuments? And then the second question that she just posed, are they a symptom of liberal politics of representation, or can they instigate change by catalyzing thought and action? So Megan, if you would go to the next one. So Kehinde Wiley, I'm just going to give a little background. I'm sure a lot of you know his work. His painting is inspired by classical works, and we have this in TLC, page 944 and 945. This is a painting of Chancellor Séguier at the entry of Louis XIV. Oh, I've made my Roman numerals backwards, into Paris in 1660. And Charles Lebrun, who's the painter here, was the court. He was in charge of all of the art in the court of Louis XIV. So he had a big job of representing the court, the monarchy, and even the city of Paris in particular ways. And of course, we all know that Louis XIV had extremely extravagant tastes. But Lebrun really believed that you could tell a story through symbols and through iconography. And so if you look, you know, so Séguier was sort of the head lawyer for the monarchy. He was a very important, he was the Chief Justice, actually. And he and his entourage are about to enter Paris here to celebrate Louis's marriage. And if you look at the young men, they're pages, they're counselors, treasurers, secretaries. So how do you think that this painting characterizes Séguier? Anybody want to pop something in there? What impression do we have of him? And of his whole sort of entourage?
Being entitled.
Entitled, okay.
Pampered.
Right. Pampered, okay. You know, I would also suggest that, you know, it's kind of uplifting. It seems, you know, they're not dressed in war clothes. They seem very refined. It's creating a picture of what the entry into Paris to celebrate this marriage of Louis XIV is. They seem pretty refined. Yes, they do seem entitled. So if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. All right, so will look familiar to you. Kehinde Wiley is a photorealist painter. He's inspired by traditional portraitists from the Western canon, Reynolds, Gainsborough, Titian, Ingres. And what he does is he seeks out young black men and women. It used to only be men, but now he's got some amazing paintings of women. And he shows them a lot of works by these classic artists, and they pick one that they really connect to. And he poses them in the style of this classic painting. So this is the Chancellor Séguier on horseback. And you'll notice that the subjects are in contemporary clothes. And it's a little hard to see here, but the backgrounds are so beautiful in his paintings. And they're inspired by African textiles. And the contrast with the Lebrun is so interesting, I think, in part because of the way the young men are dressed. Now, for all I know, the guys in the Séguier painting were in the equivalent of hip-hop fashion in Paris in, you know, 1619 or whatever it was. But in what ways does this painting subvert some of the conventions of Western painting? Anybody want to pitch in with that question?
People of color.
They're people of color, yep, definitely. Let's just go back to Lebrun for 1 second. Just let's take a look. You know, my first instinct is that they're all dressed exactly alike, but then when I look at it, I don't know, maybe they're not. Maybe they're a little bit more individualistic. But certainly, Séguier is in that long gown flowing down. He has the big hat. He's being shaded by the umbrellas, the parasols, I should say. They're circling him in a very kind of reverent way. Okay, let's go back to Wiley and take another look. Similarities or differences, what do you see? Men of color, of course.
Hierarchy.
A hierarchy as much as the Lebrun or less?
The same. Looks the same.
Looks the same. You think the guy on the horse, well, I guess just being on the horse puts him up there.
Somebody's holding the umbrella for him.
They are holding the umbrellas. Okay.
Robin, is someone standing behind the horse? I see some shoes down here underneath.
That's a really good, I've never noticed that. And maybe it's a fake horse. You know, you know, where there are people playing the horse, the front and the back. It doesn't look like a realistic horse, does it?
No, it doesn't.
As opposed to the young men who are extremely realistic looking. I mean, I love I love the clothes. There's such great detail. And I want to just say that his portraits are monumental. They're really big. If you've seen them in a museum, they usually take up a whole wall. They really have a lot to say for themselves. And you'll notice that the textiles in the background, but also the flowers, excuse me, in the front. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
I'm sorry, Robin. We also had a comment from Adrian who said, after seeing the first one, the second one says, you get a car and you get a car. So I guess there's this idea of more egalitarianism, maybe, yeah, I think is Adrian's point in the section.
I think so too. I mean, look at the guy on the horse. He's wearing, it looks like maybe a football jersey. I can't really tell, but he's got sneakers on and baggy jeans. And the clothes are not so different. He's got a little, sorry, the word I'm going to use is schmata on his head. He's got a sort of a turban on, but it's not a giant hat like the guy in LeBron. And the gentlemen in the attendants had all kinds of different things around their heads. So I think that, these paintings are really wonderful to talk about the ways, the story that they're telling. I mean, the LeBron story, we know what the story is. It'd be interesting to ask students to tell the story of what this is. I think they'd come up with some interesting things. Okay, so let's go to the next one. And we're going to look at this statue of Robert E. Lee, which has been standing in Richmond, Virginia, on a street called Monument Avenue, and all of the other monuments to the Confederacy have been removed, but this one is still standing. And it is locked in a court case that people are saying is not going to be decided anytime soon. Interestingly, Reverend Robert W. Lee IV, the great-great-grandson of the Confederate general, gave his blessing for the monument to be removed at a news conference in June. He said the world was watching in the U.S., Virginia and the U.S., as protests over the death of Mr. Floyd convulsed the country. And he asked, if today is not the right time, when will it be the right time to remove the statue? Which I found kind of fascinating. So at the same time that this has been going on, if you could go to the next slide, Megan, Kehinde Wiley created this fantastic sculpture called Rumors of War. And it's his largest sculpture to date. It's 27 feet high and 16 feet wide. And you can see that it was inspired by the heroic equestrian statues of the Confederate generals that were already in Richmond, Virginia. And it was displayed, and that's what this picture, in New York City's Times Square. And lots and lots of people got to see it. And then it was moved down to its permanent home in Richmond at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So it's quite spectacular. Megan, can you turn to the next slide, please? This is a detail. And what you'll notice up close is that the figure here has dreadlocks. He's wearing a hoodie. He's wearing jeans and ripped jeans, actually, which you can't see here. And so an interesting question is, does this, or in what ways does this statue reclaim history? And what about that title, Rumors of War? I find that sort of fascinating. Does anybody have any comments about this or questions? Okay. All right, we'll just go to one more slide, which I'm sure a lot of you know about this, but Kehinde Wiley was chosen as the official portraitist by Barack Obama. And, like anything, it's a little bit, controversial, but the choice of the painters left to the subject, and Obama chose Kehinde Wiley. And Wiley has said that there was a twin narrative in the choice of the painter and in the work itself, which I think would be an interesting thing to ask students to examine. And then Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote about the statue, about the painting, I'm sorry, and he described the Obama presidency this way. He said, for 8 years, Barack Obama walked on ice and never fell. And it would be an interesting question to ask students about the presidency, but also whether this portrait reflects that. You'll notice there's no horizon line. Obama is sitting amidst the foliage there, and if you read about it, you'll find that the foliage reflects the different places that he lived. Hawaii, Indonesia, yeah, the flowers are represent those things. But I find the way he's sitting on that chair without a horizon line to steady you very, very interesting. And it would be interesting, I think, to ask kids to discuss that. And now I'm going to turn this over to Megan, who's going to take us into the world of sports.
Yay.
Unless you have a comment. Sorry, did anybody want to add anything about the Wiley?
Not to what you said earlier on, Robin, about Maya Lin. Maya Lin has described that Vietnam Veterans Memorial as an anti-monument.
Yes, yeah. It's pretty great, isn't it? Okay.
Hey,
it's all great. I love all of this art. It just makes me so happy.
Okay.
And I've seen this portrait in person, and it's stunning and it's incredible.
And I hear that the
pictures taken in front of it. They keep wanting to take their pictures in front of that one and Michelle's.
Yes. Yeah. I am one of those. And Toni Morrison, and I got my picture in front of Toni Morrison's portrait. So was this one more thing that should be mentioned, Robin?
And I'll just mention it quickly. The Mellon Foundation has committed $250 million. Megan, I think there's something at the bottom of it. Is that the end of it? Oh no, it's right there. Anyway, to fund projects. This is just my suggestion to schools to look into it, and this one to contextualize existing monuments and memorials. That is something you could do in your own community. I would love to know, you'll see our emails at the end. I would love to talk to anybody who's interested in this. It's quite extraordinary, and this is the biggest endowment or the biggest grant project they have ever had. And they said it has changed. The Mellon Foundation is now fully committed full-time to social justice. And this is their first big project.
Okay. I like it. I'm excited. All right. So talking about this moment, and Renee and Robin have, I think, done an excellent job, as always, of showing us how texts that already exist, that are already in TLC, connect and are still relevant to what's going on in the world today. One of the other chapters in the book is the sports chapter. And so as Tiffany mentioned at the very beginning, I teach an AP class, and I'm always looking for ways to bring what's happening in the moment into the classroom. So this is about a month ago, September 10th, although I think I came across it on September 11th, came across this video on Twitter and thought that it was powerful and perfect as a way of modeling the rhetorical situation, which I had recently introduced, and of course, like we keep coming back to throughout the entire year. So I'm going to show this video. I don't think many people ended up coming across it. It was in the news, but it's only about 3 minutes long. So I'm going to go ahead and show it so that everyone can watch. But what I'd like for everyone to do is in the chat, if you could, when you hear a word or an image that resonates with you for some reason, if you could put that in the chat. So a word or image while you're watching that resonates with you, and then we'll come back to what you put. We'll have Tiffany tell us what you put at the end. So let's see. I think I practiced this. We're going to see if I can actually do this again correctly, but I'm pretty sure I can.
Is it authentic? That's the mystery.
Or is it just another symbolic victory? Now there's two anthems. Do we kneel? Do we stand?
If we could just right our wrongs, we wouldn't need two songs.
We don't need another publicity parade.
So we'll just stay inside.
Until it's time to play the game.
Whatever happened to the funds that were promised? All of a sudden we got a collapsed pocket?
The bottom line should not be the net profit.
You can't open your heart when it's controlled by your wallet.
Decals and patches.
Fireworks and trumpets?
We're not puppets.
Don't publicize false budgets. Ask the pundits and we shouldn't have a say.
If you speak up for change, then I'll shut up and play.
If we remain silent, that would just be selfish.
Since they don't have a voice, we're speaking up for the helpless.
It's not enough to act like you care for the troops.
Millions for pregame patriotism. You get paid to salute.
Lift every voice and sing.
It's just a way to save face.
Lose the mask and stop hiding the real game face.
So if my dad was a soldier, but the cops killed my brother, do I stand for one anthem and then kneel for the other?
This attempt to unify only creates more divide.
So we'll skip this song and dance.
And as a team, we'll stay inside.
We need changed hearts, not just a response to pressure.
Enough. No more fluff and empty gestures.
We need owners with influence and pockets bigger than ours.
To call up officials.
And flex political power.
When education is not determined by where we reside.
And we have the means to purchase what the doctor prescribed.
And you fight for prison reform and innocent lives. And you repair the communities that were tossed to the side.
And you admit you gained from it and you swallowed your pride.
And when greed is not the compass, but love is the guide.
And when the courts don't punish skin color, but punish the crime.
Until then, we'll just skip the long production and stay inside.
For centuries, we've been trying to make you aware.
Either you're in denial or just simply don't really care.
It's not a black-white thing.
Or a left-right thing.
Let's clean the whole bird.
And stop arguing about which wing.
Before the media starts wondering and guessing, they just answered all your questions. We'll just stay inside.
Okay. So it's really powerful. So Tiffany, could you share maybe some words or images that people put in the chat?
Yeah, sure. So some words that stood out to people are publicity parade, glass pocket, puppets. If you speak for change, I'll shut up and play. You get paid to salute, skip the song and dance. Are you saying that my voice only matters on the game field? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So there's also, by the way, a whole other lesson that you could put into place just based on the visuals and the choices to make the backdrop black and to have the side lighting, and I mean you can do a whole other thing on that. But I did want to share some ideas on how you can use this video to connect to some of the skills and ideas that we're teaching with analyzing rhetoric. So some people out there are a host of different platforms people are using now. This example that I want to share, and Tiffany, I think if you can put the link in the chat, are you able to do that?
Yep,
yes.
I'm doing it right.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. It's also weird because we're so used to like Zoom now, and then this is a different platform. We're playing the game. So some people use Google, and there's an app called Jamboard, and that's what we're using tonight. Others of you may use Nearpod. Some people use Padlet. Whatever way you get to this place where people can really collaborate. So I'm gonna go there. We're going there. We've gotten there twice. Here we go. And everyone in the audience actually should be able to add to this Jamboard. So we're just practicing and playing. Like this is just a simulation, and we don't have like an entire class period, obviously. But if you would like to add something as we're talking, as I'm kind of explaining these ideas, over here on the left, there's a sticky note option. And so you can actually type. So if I wanted to ask people, okay, identify, who is an audience for this video, then you can create a sticky note and add it on there, and that's kind of fun. Yes. Ooh, people are doing it. It's so fun. Okay. So, so you could ask your students, and again, you could go through, somebody said they're not seeing my screen.
Yeah, it's not on your screen.
You can't see the screen?
I got it.
I think you need to reshare your screen, Megan, if you'd like.
Okay, I'm gonna click it. Is that better?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yay! Okay, good. All right, so people are adding things, and that's beautiful and amazing. So you could ask your students, you could either divide and conquer, or, you know, just as a small group, you can kind of walk through these steps. But obviously, you could say, if you're talking about tone, you want your students to be able to identify, okay, what's the attitude toward? Like, is it a certain group, or is it a topic, or is it an idea? What's the audience or subject? Then you could ask them for that textual evidence, right? And then, of course, you want to arrive at the tone word. So one of the things that you could do, I see some people are drawing lines here, which is fun, is let's say you wanted to write glass pockets, as someone mentioned that from the chat, as an example, and then you could connect, we could say, okay, well, who is he referring to who has glass pockets, right? And then we can draw our line, and then we could say, what's the tone? So you can kind of play with this whole idea, but basically what you're trying to get at is getting kids to connect these pieces and these ideas. So
Megan,
yes.
excuse me, Megan, what was the thing about the anthems? What was that? Was that part of the context for it there?
So yes. So before the game was going to be played, in advance, the players knew that I guess the owners had decided to play two different anthems, the national anthem and the I think I have it. Let me go back.
Lift every voice and sing. That's it.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And so in advance, the Dolphins, the team, decided we're going to stay in the locker room. And so they published this video, essentially this poem, to explain their decision in advance so that people understood what they were doing and why.
Wow.
Yeah, right? Okay, so other things, and I know we're kind of short on time, some other ideas you can use after you get kids talking about these different elements. I have found with my students that they really struggle with, I call these analysis nuggets. Some of my kids are like, well, we don't like that term, but I think that kids, if they have obviously models for how to put all these pieces together, if they've got some sentence frames at the beginning, it's kind of the training wheels version of everything. You can have them practice putting these elements together. So I put a couple of different sentence frames here. This would be my next step. And then finally, the last kind of idea I wanted to share, which people can add to this, it's the 5th through the 8th slide. I like to give the kids a chance to express themselves about a topic of their choice, but using the writing as a model. So, I've got imitation option number 1, number 2, number 3, and these are just pulled from the poem. And you could say to your students, okay, take a topic you're interested in and make the sentence, imitate the sentence structure, and imitate the parallelism. Like, how could you use this as a model for something that you wanted to write about? So anyway, if anybody wants to give that a shot while we're doing Q&A, you're welcome to add your imitations to this. There are a lot of ways to go on this concept, but this works. I think all of these pieces work with anything that is contemporary that comes out, and then you can connect it to whatever piece you've already decided to use, like Mitch Landrieu's piece, or something from the sports chapter, or anything along those lines. So I think that sums everything up.
Megan, can I ask a quick question? I know we're going to get to Q&A, but just one quick question. If
Sure.
you're working with tone, because you have that beautiful visual with the different camera angles and colors and placement, do students pick up on that as contributing to tone?
Yes. The short answer is yes. Yes. And I think that, again, it's what I like about this video and some of the things that are published on social media is they're short enough that you can come back to it, right? Like we could come back to this when we're talking about visual analysis.
Yeah. No, well, I can also start visual analysis. It's great. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think, Tiffany, I'm turning it over to you, so to speak. Let me go back to this.
We have a very quick ending, but let's see if there are we have some final thoughts, but let's see if there are questions first. If not,
Sure.
the people could just take a look at that on their own, unless we have the time. But are there questions, Tiffany?
We do have one really quick one. Catherine's asking, is there a James Baldwin reading in the 3rd edition of Language of Commons?
Of course. Of course. Talk to teachers. Let me see. I don't know what page it is, but I happen to have the book right here. So just one moment and I will tell you. But you're right, Catherine, the thing is, there's something from the fire next time on 994 and talk to teachers is on page 212. But we could do a whole book on, every we have something on James Baldwin. And these days he's, everybody talks about him, and Robin does a James Baldwin Day at her school. So
I do. I'm hoping we can figure out some version of it for this year. And Renee is always a guest star. It's very nice.
Well, the documentary
this time.
Yeah, the documentary is so fantastic. The I Am Not Your Negro. That is absolutely perfect. Yep. Any other questions, Tiffany?
Do you know if you guys are planning an AP Literature webinar anytime soon? Or want to do an AP Literature webinar in the spring?
Well, we have a webinar on the 12th of November, I believe, on our American Lit book, American Literature and Rhetoric. So that's something to think about. And as far as the literature book, I'm sure we will be glad to do it. Please make that suggestion to your sales rep or to Tiffany here and Phoenix before we finish. We enjoy this. We are ending on poetry, though, and I'm going to, this when I listened to the New Yorker Festival, I went to some sessions a few weeks ago, and Elizabeth Alexander, the poet, who is also now the president of the Mellon Foundation, was talking with Brian Stevenson, whom we've also mentioned, and who is in TLC 3, and they talked and they were talking about this Frederick Douglass poem, and they were talking about looking toward the past, and this is Robert Hayden's poem on Frederick Douglass. So I've thought, what a great assignment. Again, very old school, but just ask kids to think about somebody. I'm sorry. I thought I heard something.
No, you went out for a second. Go ahead. Keep going.
No, I'm saying that we just have an assignment there that you might just ask kids who would they call on for advice and guidance. And 3 poems here are Hayden to Frederick Douglass, Wordsworth calls on Milton, and recently the American Academy of Poets featured Haki Matavuti on to Gwendolyn Brooks. So if the last slide is the Douglass poem, we could end with that. Larry promised to read it for us if we want to. If there are no more questions. So, you want to read, Larry? Oh.
Unmute yourself.
Larry's muted. Well, Elizabeth Alexander talked about Hayden and some of the beautiful lines in this poem, particularly this beautiful, needful thing. And we have there are many monuments to Douglas. This one's in Central Park, and I believe it's a fairly recent one. Central Park. There you are.
I've been in a strange situation here. I don't know if anyone has seen my mouth moving throughout this webinar, and I kept unmuting myself to no effect. But okay, here I am. I mean, I suppose I could read the poem if anyone is still paying attention.
I think they're there. We can just say thank you to all of them and let you read as a farewell.
All righty.
Walk us off the floor.
You know, I can't help but just ask one question, though, that I would for my students, and that is, which do you find is the most unusual word? Now, I won't say the word impactful, but I think that's what I mean. I find one word in this poem is immensely intriguing. At any rate, when it is finally ours, this freedom, this liberty, this beautiful and terrible thing, needful to man as air, unstable as earth, when it belongs at last to all, when it is truly instinct, brain matter, diastole, systole, reflex action, when it is finally one, when it is more than the gaudy mumbo-jumbo of politicians, this man, this Douglas, this former slave, this Negro beaten to his knees, exiled, visioning a world where none is lonely, none hunted, alien. This man, superb in love and logic, this man shall be remembered. Oh, not with statues' rhetoric, not with legends and poems and wreaths of bronze alone, but with the lives grown out of his life, the lives fleshing his dream of the beautiful, needful thing.
Thank you.
The word visioning, not revisioning, not envisioning. That knocks me out.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Lovely.
And we could, okay, yeah, I was going to say, is he evoking Yeats at the beginning here? I can't help but think that he is. This terrible beauty of being born. Yeah, it's a wonderful poem.
Wonderful.
Amazing, rich piece. I don't know who finally unmuted me. I've been trying for a long time. I'll mute myself.
This is a nice one. You could even ask it, which is the better monument, his poem, or something, an artifact, a visual artifact. Megan, if you go to the next one, we have our emails, and we just want to thank you all. I think everything you all are doing right now is nothing short of miraculous, and please keep doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Good night, Megan, Robin, and Larry, and Phoenix.
Good night, my dear co-authors.
All right.
And thank you all authors for doing this tonight.
Our pleasure. My dear co-authors.
All right.
And thank you all authors for doing this tonight.
Our pleasure.